Hi friends, welcome to the Wild Side. I'm Steve Hall. In full disclosure, I've known the man we're featuring in our first story for more than 3 decades. We became friends from the first time we met, partly because we're both broadcast journalists originally from Indiana and ended up in Tennessee working in television news way back when. We both love the outdoors, but he's done something I would never do.
One of the reasons I like to come out to Radnor is it's just so beautiful. I mean, that's pretty much the obvious answer to everything is 4 seasons a year. It's a great place to come here and walk and commune with nature and just see some really lovely things.
Along with its natural presence, Radnor Lake State Park brings a familiarity to Stephan Foust for the time he hiked coast to coast across the continental United States.
Walking here at Radnor, honestly, is a lot like what it was to walk through North Carolina and Tennessee and Arkansas when I crossed the country. I spent a lot of time on small 2-lane roads, trees on both sides, lots of nature out there.
He met many strangers then, and he meets many strangers now.
This would have been 1979 and 1980, so.
A little before I was alive.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
While he enjoys answering questions and reflecting on days gone by in this peaceful setting, Stephan also finds a little rowdier relevance in cowboy action shooting.
We're here outside War Trace, Tennessee at the home of the War Trace Regulators, which is the Single Action Shooting Society club. And it's kind of another version of Radnor Lake to me. My love of history kind of drives me with almost everything that I choose to do recreationally, and this is a classic example of that. I love history, I love the Old West, and doing this, I get to really bring that into fruition. Spend all this time accumulating my clothing so that it's period accurate, same way with the weaponry. And I'm surrounded by men and women of the same mind who also love history and love the Old West. And it's just a great opportunity to get together and celebrate that.
Several of Steve's gunslinging friends are well aware of his past.
His concept of doing that was unbelievable. You know, all the perils he might have gone through and stuff, so it's something else.
I give him a lot of credit. That's a long way to walk, and what he went through out there is a life experience that most people would never even dream of.
I think he really likes to continuously broaden his perspectives, and doing this is one of the things that's helped with that.
And just as he strives for historical accuracy in cowboy clothing, Steve's desire for authenticity, in a way, is what inspired his transcontinental journey in 1979. He was still teaching history in Indiana, telling his junior high classes how he admired those westbound settlers.
I wanted to do it, and when a student dared me to do it in the middle of a history lecture where I was rambling on and ranting on about how great it would have been to just be able to take off and move west if that's what you wanted to do. And a kid honestly said to me, well, if you think it's so cool, why don't you go do it? It was like an explosion. And standing there right in front of that class, I took a moment and paused and said, you know, you just might be right about that. And that's what launched the whole thing.
And so began his trek from the beach at Nags Head, North Carolina, 487 days and nights to Point Reyes National Seashore near San Francisco, California. An exhausting, sometimes grueling, even life-threatening adventure.
The real threats, more than anything else, were natural threats, lightning storms. Made a foolish move and got myself caught out in a horrible blizzard. Things that could have killed me, but for one reason or another, I managed to come through the other end. The worst 4 days of my life, the most difficult 4 days of my life, was walking across the Utah salt flats, the Bonneville salt flats, in the middle of summer. The daily temperatures were well over 100, 110 every day. no shade, alone the entire time. Every afternoon, almost on cue, a sandstorm would blow up and just pound me for a half an hour to 45 minutes. It was impossible to walk during that. All I could do is sit down, huddle down behind my backpack, wrap myself in my space blanket, and let it all wash over me until it was finished. And then, at the end of that, the temperature would have dropped 20, 30, maybe even 40 degrees. The sun would be going down. It would just be beautiful. I was a different person after the end of that 4 days than I was before. I think those challenges make you into who you are.
Once a week, he had to find a telephone for a weekly call-in show, sharing his adventure with listeners to WSBT Radio back in South Bend, Indiana. And news reporters awaited him nearly everywhere he went.
What that meant is that when I would walk into a town, usually looking pretty bad, dirty, smelling, a total stranger, I wasn't viewed as a threat. It was like, there's that guy. I want to talk to that guy. And people would approach me as opposed to me having to approach them. It changed the entire dynamic of it. It opened the door to all kinds of opportunities and experiences and people that I never would have had under any other set of circumstances. It would have been a totally different experience.
In Colorado, Steve took the old Santa Fe Trail, anxious to reach historic Bent's Fort, where those early pioneers could get wagon repairs, supplies, and protection. Then something unexpected happened.
I decided to take a little afternoon siesta, which was pretty much my thing during that particular period of time. So I sat down along the wagon ruts, took off my pack, laid down against it and fell asleep, and the next thing I knew, I hear this chinking sound of tin against wood, and I sat up and looked up through the tall grass, and here comes a wagon train. For a moment, I thought, my God, I really have gone back in time. And so I stood up in shock to see this wagon train coming right at me. And then I look to the side and I see a camel car. And I realized, oh, okay, this is what's going on. Interestingly enough, the cast and crew recognized me before I recognized them. So I ended up spending an entire week with the cast and crew of the Chisholms. At the time that starred a very young Delta Burke, pre-designing women. She accepted a bet from some of her fellow actors that she couldn't keep up with me for a day on the trail. She described herself as very much a girly girl at the time and wasn't quite sure whether or not she was going to be successful at this venture, but she had a real iron will and accomplished the goal.
He had initially planned to write a book soon after reaching San Francisco, and then he didn't.
It was impossible for me to write for years and years after the fact. It was just all bottled up inside of me. In a lot of ways, it was more than my poor feeble mind could handle at the time. And it took me a long time to really process the experience that I had been through.
Years later, Steve went back to visit media mentors in South Bend, where he started his career in broadcast journalism.
And so here we are sitting at a restaurant, and my first news director looks me in the eyes and says, you know, I hired you because you were a wonderful storyteller, and yet you've got this wonderful story in your background and you've never told it. Now, why is that? Which pretty much just reduced me to mumbling incoherently, and he just fixed me with a look and said, tell the story.
A Leaf in the Stream is the title. He decided to write it as a novel, sometimes with composite characters and reconstructed dialogue that captures the feeling of those original conversations.
Had I written it years before, it would have been just simply I, talking about me, from my perspective. And that's a very limited perspective.
Now enjoying his new adventures, Stephan Foust makes a connection from the past to the present, even in his cowpuncher persona, Nanta Hale and Ned.
Many of the men and women that I shoot with They remind me a lot of folks that I stayed with, folks that I met along the way, folks that offered me all kinds of help and kindnesses along the way. I feel very much a part of this.
The connection is just as true while hiking in a state park.
The experience of walking across the country was one where I would just encounter people and fall into conversations with people that I had never met. And that's the same thing that's true here when you take a walk through Radnor, is that you're going to encounter people, strangers that you've never seen before. And most of the time you end up in conversations where you're telling each other your life stories, and it just feels the same. It feels so good and so natural to me that I'm drawn to this place. How are you? We live in a great country. It's a good day with great people. People who are going to help you out when you need help. And I think we forget that from time to time.
Steve's hiking boots, backpack, and walking stick have taken a place in history at the Daviess County Museum in Washington, Indiana, Steve's hometown. After years of working in television news, Steve taught communications at Middle Tennessee State University and was the school's founding director of the Center for Innovation in Media.
Tennessee's Wild Side has been a presentation of the Jackson Foundation in association with Rockwater TV.